Welcome to This Explainer. We tend to think of our drinking habits as just a cultural quirk, right? Like it's a modern pastime, maybe just a way to unwind after a super long day. But okay, let's dive right into the startling truth here. Human drinking is actually an ancient, hardwired, evolutionary survival mechanism. So you gotta ask yourself, is drinking a modern problem? We so often tie alcohol consumption to our modern stress, bustling nightlife, or, industrial mass production. It really feels like something we invented just to cope with civilization. But what if the craving for it is actually older than history itself? Well, the short answer? No. It's absolutely not a modern problem. In fact, it's literally older than humanity. Our biological relationship with intoxication predates our very species by millions of years. This isn't just some random quirk of human history. It's a story deeply, deeply rooted in our evolutionary biology. And this perfectly illustrates the chronological mystery we're tracing today. We're going to take a journey from natural fermentation on the tropical jungle floor 10 million years ago to the monumental architecture at Göbekli Tepe 11,000 years ago, all the way up to the rise of industrial distillation in the 18th century. Okay, part one, the jungle origins. Survival of the drunkest. Let's set the scene. Picture a tropical jungle floor, 10 million years ago, just covered in rotting, naturally fermenting fruit. Long before humans even knew what brewing was, nature was just doing it automatically. And our early primate ancestors, they managed to survive this thanks to something called the ADH4 mutation. This was a completely spontaneous, random change in a digestive enzyme, but it made them dramatically better at digesting ethanol. Suddenly, they could safely consume this rotting fruit without getting dangerously sick. Now, you might be wondering why on earth would they actively seek out rotting fruit in the first place? Well, for one, it emitted a really strong, pungent smell, which made it incredibly easy to sniff out in a dense, confusing jungle canopy. But more importantly, it contained way higher calories than fresh fruit. So because it was easier to find and just packed with vital energy, those strange primate species who could handle a little buzz simply survived better. They literally outcompeted the sober ones. Moving right along to part two, beer before bread, the dawn of civilization. So how exactly did we get from passive jungle foraging to active, purposeful manufacturing? Well, consider the number 20. 20 tons. At an archaeological site called Göbekli Tepe in modern-day Turkey, hunter-gatherers miraculously organized enough labor to move stone pillars weighing up to 20 tons each. And get this, they did this 11,000 years ago, long before cities or kingdoms or even writing existed. I mean, how do you convince hundreds of prehistoric people to do all that back-breaking labor before money or cities were even a concept? Well, giant stone basins found nearby point to a truly staggering theory. They were brewing early beer. That's right, the prevailing idea is that they achieved this massive feat of labor because they were brewing huge batches of alcohol to drink together. Farming itself might have actually been invented just so we could secure a stable supply of booze. Crazy, right? Just think about alcohol's psychological impact for a second. It lowers fear, it builds trust, it encourages storytelling, and it creates really intense social bonding. These aren't just fun side effects for Friday night out. They are the absolute foundational neurological behaviors required to get cautious, territorial human beings to actually cooperate and build a civilization. Which brings us to part three, liquid infrastructure, survival in a deadly world. As these early societies grew, alcohol transformed from just a tool for social bonding into an absolute biological necessity. Throughout ancient history, ordinary water was a huge gamble. It was highly dangerous, teeming with deadly parasites and bacteria that could easily wipe out entire communities. Ancient beer, on the other hand, was fundamentally safer. The brewing process killed off those dangerous pathogens and stabilized the liquid. Mild alcohol wasn't a party drink. It was literally a life-saving daily hydration alternative. It sounds completely unbelievable to a modern ear, I know, but Egyptian pyramid laborers were actually paid partly in beer rations, drinking several liters every single day. Civilization practically ran on fermentation. Even medieval children drank weak beer for breakfast. Workers built monumental cities while mildly intoxicated, simply because drinking sober water was often a death sentence. But actually, scratch that image of your Friday night IPA. Ancient beer was radically different. While modern beer is this clear, highly processed liquid consumed largely for recreation, ancient beer was basically a weak, thick, cloudy fermented grain soup. It was so chunky that people sometimes had to drink it through long straws just to bypass the floating debris. It was essentially liquid calories that softened the brutal reality of a prehistoric life filled with constant labor, wild predators, and absolutely no painkillers or antibiotics. All right, part 4, religion and poison, the dual nature of intoxication. To the ancient mind, catching a buzz felt so completely supernatural that it actually became divine. In fact, one of humanity's earliest written documents was basically a brewing tutorial disguised as a prayer to the Sumerian beer goddess, Ninkasi. They revered this substance so deeply, they genuinely believed it required its very own deity to watch over the process. Intoxication was literally a religious experience. But of course, there was a massive unseen physical toll. Humanity spent thousands of years experimenting blindly, totally unaware of the biological dangers. Take the Roman wine crisis, for example. You had massive daily consumption across all classes, politicians, soldiers, workers. But their wine was frequently sweetened using lead containers and lead syrup. Modern researchers suspect this caused chronic lead poisoning that affected the Roman elite for generations. It's been linked to mood disorders, mental decline, and infertility. It's just a really unsettling reminder of how blind our ancestors were to what they were actually putting in their bodies. And that leads us to part 5, the modern escalation, industrializing intoxication. So for thousands of years, this ancient, slow-brewing relationship was pretty steady, but it changed forever with one huge technological hack, distillation. This was a process invented to create dramatically stronger, fast-acting alcohol. For most of history, getting drunk took time, right? Because natural fermentation was slow and the resulting drink was pretty weak. But the invention of distillation meant intoxication happened rapidly, fundamentally shifting alcohol from a weak daily survival staple into a highly potent substance. And wow, did things change fast. What followed was the absolute global industrialization of alcohol. Intoxication became dramatically stronger and faster. Entire economies formed around its production. Governments started heavily taxing the trade, and highly profitable empires traded it globally, literally using it to finance entire wars. By the time the Industrial Revolution rolled around, it had become one of the most profitable substances on planet Earth. But here's the crazy part. Despite this massive industrial shift and its newfound potency, we just continue to treat drinking as perfectly natural. Why? Well, because natural fermentation was quite literally everywhere in our evolutionary history. Rotting fruit on the jungle floor, naturally fermented honey, even meat. For millions of years, fermentation was simply a permanent part of the environment we evolved inside. It wasn't just some human invention, it was our habitat. Just think about your own life for a second. Gathering in a group, sharing a fermented drink, exchanging stories and laughter, deepening human connection. Even if we're sitting in a modern city glowing under neon lights, we're still gathering and acting out the exact same rituals those ancient hunter-gatherers did thousands of years ago around those ancient stone basins. So that really leaves us with this final, profound mystery. How could a species shaped by millions of years of fermentation ever completely stop? The reality is, somewhere deep inside your brain, your ancient ancestors are still chasing that exact same feeling. Next time you raise a glass, remember who you're really drinking with. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer, and I'll catch you next time.